Caroline of Monaco turned 68, carrying a story that the principality has rarely told in full. Not simply the story of her mother's fatal crash in 1982 or the powerboat accident that killed her husband in 1990, but the quieter, deeper story of a woman shaped by duty before she ever had a chance to choose her own life. She once admitted that what she had to do always came before what she wanted to do. That sentence, short and simple, captures nearly everything. She was born on January 23, 1957, inside the Prince's Palace of Monaco. Not in a hospital or private clinic, but in the royal apartments themselves, where even her first breath carried political weight. Because of the 1918 Franco-Monet gas treaty, Monaco's sovereignty depended on the existence of a clear royal heir. Without one, France held the legal right to absorb the tiny principality. So when Caroline entered the world, doctors were present, but so were lawyers, state officials, and the quiet fear of what failure might mean. Before she could open her eyes, she had already been registered as hereditary princess. Her arrival was treated less like a family celebration and more like a constitutional event. Newspapers across Europe printed legal commentary alongside birth announcements, explaining what her existence meant for Monaco's independence. The palace issued an official bulletin noting the exact time of her birth, around 4:15 in the afternoon, so the line of succession could be formally recorded without delay. Yet even that early significance came wrapped in uncertainty. Caroline was heir presumptive, not heir absolute. Under Monaco's succession laws at the time, a younger brother would automatically outrank an older sister. She was being presented as the future of the dynasty, but her position was already fragile. That quiet instability set the emotional tone for much of what followed. The home she grew up in only deepened that feeling. Her mother, Grace Kelly, had been one of the most celebrated actresses in the world before marrying Prince Rainier III in 1956. She had an Academy Award, major Hollywood roles, and a career earning around $100,000 per film, the equivalent of nearly $1 million per picture in today's money. She gave all of it up. By the time Caroline was born a year later, Grace had already stopped acting. She smiled for cameras, stood at ceremonies, and looked perfect in public. But people close to her later said that in private, she mourned what she had sacrificed. Friends recalled her sometimes watching her old films alone in the palace cinema, not simply for nostalgia, but to remember the woman she had once been. Around her children, she was no longer Grace Kelly. She was Her Serene Highness, addressed formally by servants, bound by protocol, and shaped by appearances. Prince Rainier III brought his own kind of pressure. He had taken the throne in 1949 at just 25 and ran Monaco with the focus of a businessman building an empire, expanding hotels, strengthening casinos, and transforming the principality into a luxury destination for the world's wealthy. Staff later described the palace as a place where work came before warmth. Rainier could spend 12 hours on duty and still be signing papers late into the night. Even inside the palace, life often felt more official than personal. Courtiers later said Rainier and Grace frequently ate on different schedules or in separate rooms. The children, meanwhile, dined apart from their parents entirely. For Caroline, some of her earliest memories were not of being cuddled or soothed. They were of being arranged, presented, and watched. That separation lasted until she was around 14. In a palace full of people, she could still feel completely alone. The person she leaned on most was not her mother or her father, but her nanny, Maureen Wood. Caroline and her younger brother Albert became so attached to her that when Maureen left for vacation, both children cried and pleaded so desperately that Grace had to call her back early. In a home filled with titles and formality, the nanny became the one person who felt genuinely safe. Then, on March 14th, 1958, everything quietly shifted again. Her brother Albert was born. Under Monaco's succession rules, a male heir immediately moved ahead of any older sister. In a single moment, Caroline went from being the kingdom's guarantee to second place, before she could even say her parents' names. The duty remained. The pressure remained. But the certainty did not. Her escape came through education. though even that carried its own isolation. She attended St. Mary's in Ascot, then Sciences Po in Paris, and eventually the Sorbonne, where she studied philosophy, psychology, and biology. She was bright, disciplined, and academically strong, earning her French baccalaureate with high honors. But the press barely cared. While she was living as a serious student, the world was far more interested in where she went at night. She became a regular in Paris nightlife, especially at places where she could feel, at least for a few hours, less like a princess and more like a young woman trying to breathe. The tabloids turned her social life into a personality, flattening an intelligent and thoughtful woman into the image of a party princess. The heart of the palace tried to control that image through press releases and arranged appearances, the more she pushed back. The result was constant, grinding tension. Then came Philippe Junot. Caroline was 21 when she married him in 1978. He was 38, a French businessman with a reputation for charm, nightlife, and instability. Exactly the kind of man her parents feared. Even before the wedding, the family was deeply uneasy. Grace, according to later accounts, was distressed and did not believe the marriage would last. The ceremony itself was a grand royal spectacle, but beneath the glitter, dread sat alongside the celebration. What made it worse was what followed. Junot reportedly brought a photographer friend on the honeymoon, and private images of Caroline soon found their way into tabloids. She had not just entered a bad marriage. She had entered a marriage where even her most intimate moments could be sold. By October 1980, just over 2 years after the wedding, they were divorced. The civil split was clean. The emotional aftermath was not. When Caroline met Stefano Casiraghi, her life was already full of cracks. Her mother had died in a tragic car crash on September 14, 1982, and that loss still hung over everything. Stefano was also coming out of heartbreak, having recently ended his engagement to an Italian woman. They found each other when both were bruised, tired, and quietly trying to begin again. What set Stefano apart from the many men drawn to Caroline's title and glamour was simple. He treated her like a woman, not a prize. He was 23, Italian, warm, and confident, and he made her feel safe in a way she had rarely experienced. Friends called it love at first sight. Caroline would later say they both knew it immediately. They married on December 29, 1983, in a civil ceremony at Monaco's princely palace, beneath a portrait of Grace Kelly. There was no Catholic ceremony, as the Vatican still considered her first marriage valid. The wedding lasted only about 15 minutes, but it carried enormous meaning. 3 children followed: Andrea Albert Pierre, born on June 8, 1984, Charlotte Marie Pumline on August 3, 1986, and Pierre Renier Stefano on September 5, 1987. For the first time, Caroline seemed to bloom. Stefano was a devoted, fully present father. Media reports kept returning to the same observation. For once, a Grimaldi household looked genuinely joyful. But Stefano's great passion was offshore powerboat racing, and Caroline never stopped fearing it. He raced at shocking speeds and conditions that left him dangerously exposed, and in 1990, he returned to defend his world-class one title off the New Jersey coast. Just weeks before the final race, there had already been a frightening explosion near Guernsey that he survived. Then on October 3, 1990, off Monaco's coast near Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, the boat slammed into heavy waves, flipped violently, and Stefano was trapped. His co-pilot survived. Stefano did not. He was only 30 years old. Caroline was in Paris when it happened. When she returned, she came dressed in black, now a widow with 3 children aged 6, 4, and 3. The palace announced that tragedy had revisited Monaco's royal family, and the words landed with terrible force because everyone remembered Grace Kelly's death only 8 years earlier. There were even darker whispers surrounding his death. Friends claimed Stefano had received death threats in the days before the crash, and there was talk of fears about sabotage. Police investigated, but ultimately ruled an accident. That official answer closed the case, but it could not quiet the feeling that the loss was almost too cruel to bear. The same sea visible from the palace had taken her husband, just as a Monaco mountain road had taken her mother. Caroline disappeared from public life. She retreated with her 3 children to a quiet village in France, far from cameras and the water that now seemed haunted. Those who saw her said grief had transformed her, thinner, quieter, hollowed out. She never spoke in detail about the pain, but those around her understood she had suffered 2 life-breaking losses before turning 34. She told her children simply that their father was with Jesus in heaven, and that they would look after each other now. Yet she kept working. Her public service had begun as early as 1979, when her parents made her president of Monaco's Committee for the International Year of the Child. In 1981, she founded Jeune J'écoute, a helpline for young people struggling with drugs, abuse, neglect, and suicidal thoughts, work that felt deeply personal given her own lonely childhood. After Grace's death, she became president of the Princess Grace Foundation, launched the Ballet de Monte Carlo in 1985, and helped make Monaco a genuinely cultural destination. Later, she served as a UNICEF patron and UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador, supporting girls' education and children in war zones. The widow label eventually gave way to something steadier, a woman turning pain into lasting institutions. Her third relationship, with Prince Ernst August of Hanover, began in the mid-1990s under the shadow of scandal, as he was still married and his wife had once been close to Caroline. They wed on January 23, 1999, her 42nd birthday, and their daughter Alexandra was born that July. But the marriage grew troubled. Ernst became known for public outbursts, violent behavior, and a widely reported psychiatric ward episode. By 2009, after Caroline reportedly discovered him with another woman, she left and never truly returned. Legally, they remained married, but in practice the relationship had ended. Losses kept arriving. Rainier, 3, died on April 6, 2005. In December 2024, Fernanda Biafai Casaraghi, Stefano's mother, died at 99, and Caroline attended the funeral with Andrea, Charlotte, and Pierre, a quiet but powerful act of loyalty more than 3 decades after Stefano's death. Then on January 8, 2026, Philippe Junot, her first husband, died peacefully in Madrid at 85. It must have felt like the closing of a very old door. At 68, Caroline of Monaco remains a study in endurance. The Ballet de Monte Carlo marked its 40th anniversary in 2025. Studio Caroline opened beneath Villa Casamia in 2023. In December 2025, she and Prince Albert opened the Mediathèque Caroline, adding an auditorium and public access space to Monaco's cultural life. She has chosen to leave behind not only sorrow, but institutions that will outlast it. The girl born to secure a kingdom before she could open her eyes grew into a woman who found her own reasons to keep building, long after the kingdom no longer needed her to.